Welcome classic rock fans to an episode of Classic Album Review, where classic albums are excavated and explored, and today we're looking at In Absentia by Porcupine Tree. This album shook a generation from the lethargy induced by overexposure to the jangly chimes of Brit Pop, or that droning drum and bass that was infecting the music of the 1990s. For many, this heralded a prog rock revival, although it could be said that this had been threatening for a while. There were distant echoes of Moog and Mellotron rumbling away in the distance across the post-punk and new wave landscape. Then you get this geeky band of closet progsters with their own brand of alternative psychedelia. Although we say prog, I think this band has more in common with something like Talk, rather than all that fiddly, noodly prog stuff from the 1970s. And they do present us with a dark album, a disturbing Pathology, an album concerned with serial killers, ne'er-do-wells and the permanently alienated. But not only. One of the major motifs or themes on this record is absence, making this album a wish you were here for a generation lubed up on OK Computer. There was a shift sonically with this record. In Absentia differs from the previous two albums. They employ more industrial type textures, perhaps reminiscent of Nine Inch Nails. And they were a band that were gaining international recognition at this point. Their reputation was cemented, of course, with their album The Sky Moves Sideways. But In Absentia started the movement away from what many have termed, as I've said before, this alternative psychedelia, towards displaying all the hallmarks of progressive rock, for want of a better term. They were moving away from that progressive psychedelia of the earlier records to a more mature sound. We started to enjoy, if indeed enjoy is the right word here, well-crafted vocal-orientated songs focusing on the strong melodic voice of Steven Wilson, with complex guitar timings and arrangements and exquisite drum and bass moments. In Absentia is similar to the very song-orientated approach of the previous two albums like Lightbulb Sun and Stupid Dream. One critic has pointed out that with this album, each track explores a singular musical motif. Each one tends to include alternating electric and or acoustic guitars with strong synth or piano accompaniment. But for me, what marks this album out is the certainly more crunch in terms of the guitars than certainly on the previous albums. This abrasiveness as well is significant, I think, because it juxtaposes beauty with the softer, more complex meanderings. Also possibly due to the addition of a second lead guitarist. According to The Guardian, this is an album that is defined by beautifully meandering soundscapes and slightly pervy lyrics. And it certainly delves into some pretty disturbing nooks and crannies, that's for sure. As well as the overarching theme, as I've said, which is absence in a wider sense as well. It is primarily, I think, the absence of empathy or any guiding principle. In Absentia is a Latin expression which means simply, in legal parlance, that somebody can be tried, or in terms of the church, they can be excommunicated without actually being physically present. And in the context of this album, it can also suggest somebody being declared dead without actually the physical presence of a human body or human remains. But as Steven Wilson has said of this record, he says this title is in fact a kind of metaphor. There's something missing, it's an absence in the soul, he says. It's about people on the fringes, on the edges of humanity and society. I have an interest in serial killers, child molesters and wife beaters, not in what they did, but in the psychology of why. Lovely, eh? But also, the Porcupine Tree song Radar 2, I think it was called, was a song that was very much about the BTK killer who murdered, dispatched about 10 people in the Kansas area between 1974 and 1991. I say Porcupine Tree, but I think it was Steven Wilson's solo album, Grace for Drowning. Large parts of this album were actually recorded at the Power Station in New York. It's also the first album where Danish artist Lasse Hoyle got involved with the artwork. The cover, of course, features a self-portrait of the artist with his eyes rolled up into his head to reveal the blankness of the eyes relating to this idea of a complete absence of soul. And this becomes a recurring motif, not only for Porcupine Tree, but for Steven Wilson's solo material as well. You get the album Deadwing, which shows the back of a woman's head where her eyes cannot be seen. Fear of a Blank Planet has the blank eyes of a teenager. The Incident shows a hand covering her face, her eyes cannot be seen. And Wilson's solo albums as well, The Raven that refused to sing. You got The Ghost's eyes are completely blank. A gas mask covers his face on the Insurgents album, and of course To the Bone, Wilson has got his eyes closed. In Absentia is more than just a concept album about a serial killer. There's lots of other stuff going on as well. Nor is it kind of a progged up Agatha Christie like Dream Theater's Metropolis 2. You have tracks like The Sound of Muzak, which is about the way the music industry is destroying real music. You get Trains, which is essentially all about childhood nostalgia. Heart Attack and a Lay-By tells of a lonely and empty death in tragically mundane circumstances. And Prodigal describes a very lonely misfit. Seems dysfunction and the unromanticism of the world is certainly touched upon on this album. Wilson has said as late as 2020 that this In Absentia is their best album. It certainly establishes a musical landscape and language which very much defines this band from there onwards. In fact, after 3 more albums after this one, Steven Wilson decides that it's time to wrap up Porcupine Tree. Nevertheless, this album has pointed, I think, to a significant musical shift with this band. Many have suggested it's due to the leaving of the drummer Chris Maitland, replaced by Gavin Harrison. And as I said, the musical style moves away from that kind of space rock, trance, art rock of the previous albums to kind of a new hybrid progressive metal, abandoning the more trippier elements, shall we say, but nevertheless maintain a rich melodic strength and rich vocal harmonies. The band also at this point moved from indie record label Snapper to Lava Records. Wilson has also gone on record saying how proud he is of the range of analogue instruments used on this record to give this album a more authentic and almost timeless quality. For example, instruments like Hammond organ, Mellotron, Fender Rhodes, analogue synths such as the Prophet 5 and the Roland System 700. And certainly one of the most important aspects of this album is the soundscaping that's provided by the synth work on here. It is definitely very Eno-esque. There seems to be a greater ambition with this record, a desire to move away from just being a kind of a quintessential cult band. Interestingly, Allen Ginsberg said, "Follow your inner moonlight, don't hide the madness." And bravo for that. Of course, the result is this wonderful album. And it's an eclectic blend on this album, from nice acoustic passages to stabbing and visceral electric guitar. As Nick Holmes has pointed out, this album is like peeling of an onion. Each layer of your subconscious mind unravels methodically. The music coerces you to find a truth, even though it has to claw its way out. And the music delves deeply into the human psyche from various different angles. It scrutinises the madness and the mayhem of it all. It's essentially an album about you and I, and who we are, where we are, and where we could be. And it's about all those dark recesses as well. It explores that psychic imprint that the tragedy of the world leaves upon us. And a wonderful example of that is the track, the spectral piano ballad Collapse the Light into the Earth, which was inspired by the 9/11 tragedy. Also inspired as well by, influenced by Jack Briel's If You Go Away. Overall, listening to these songs is definitely a childlike fragility to them. And speaking of such, let's look at the songs now, shall we? The first track is Blackest Eyes. You get this searing guitar and heavy drums, rather odd time signature, I think, as well. And it begins in the third person, which allows us to distance ourselves from the narrator, before, of course, the viewpoint moves to that of the killer himself, and we spend the larger part of the song actually inside his head. The chorus is almost jaunty, I've got wiring loose inside my head. The words "swim with me into your blackest eyes" are certainly enticing. And blackest eyes is interesting, because we assume blackest eyes are eyes that are completely unfeeling or Maybe it's the point that the pupils dilate at the point of death, I don't know. But interestingly, of course, the track begins in drop D tuning, which adds to the atmospheric palette of this album. Trains is a mostly acoustic number with a little slab of banjo thrown in for good measure, one that deals with ultimately childhood and nostalgia. Wilson said that maybe people can't relate so much to serial killers, but everyone can relate to a song about nostalgia for childhood. It begins with strummed acoustic guitars, a very folky feel, accentuated, of course, through the beautifully layered vocals that come in about a few minutes in. Apparently the band had reservations about this track and they did not play this on the tour to promote this album. Lips of Ashes, lots of atmospheric guitar swells and vocal harmonies here, and the track opens with Wilson playing a hammered dulcimer of all instruments, believe it or not, although Wilson says that this was actually an earlier track that I think they perhaps reworked for this album. The Sound of Muzak opens with Gavin Hamilton's mid-tempo polyrhythmic hi-hat, snare and kick groove, a really nice clean guitar riff. There's certainly something very Robert Frippian about it. It has a King Crimson vibe. And the time signature 7/8 rhythm is made to feel even more complex, I think, by Gavin Harrison's wonderful offbeat drumming. Gravity Eyelids is almost a quasi-ballad merged with this industrial textures as well. It's an odd blend. And another song about eyes, of course, which, as you know, for Stephen Wilson and Porcupine Tree, is a very significant motif. Wedding Nails is apparently one of the serial killer numbers. It's an instrumental, a noisy one at that. I mean, Wilson said, for the end, we wanted to create a stifling atmosphere conveyed with chains and the scraping piano strings. I think that's our serial killer again. Prodigal is an interesting one. The emphasis is on melody and lyrics, and complex timings as well, which are quite intriguing. It deliberately describes a mental state of complete ennui, I think. It's a song essentially about a lonely misfit who connects to life via his TV. One of the lines is, I spend my days for my friends there, the ones on whom life depends, and obviously as the song goes on we soon learn that these are friends from TV shows and things like that. I'm going to miss them when the series ends, he says, which is the zinger at the end of it. Track 3 is almost entirely instrumental, a nice enigmatic couplet at the end when the couplet, black the sky, weapons fly, lay them waste for your race. Possibly a reference to World War III. Many have suggested that it's actually a reference to the Book of Peter from the New Testament, which speaks of a coming apocalypse. The Creator has a master tape. The title comes in from two sources. One was apparently telling this apocryphal story of how the master tape recordings of Jimi Hendrix's Axis Boulder's Love, I think, were lost and never found to this day, by the way. And it's another part of it's about control. The protagonist in the song raises a family entirely for the purpose of abusing them, and this thoroughly nightmarish idea. Heart Attack and a Lay-By is one of those very sad, as this meaningless life seems to end in a lay-by. You can even hear traffic passing by. It has a deep sense of pathos. It reminds me of Springsteen's Wreck on the Highway, especially in the song when the protagonist becomes increasingly unwell. Lines like, I don't feel too good, can't breathe too well, just need to lie down. But at some point it dawns on him, of course, that he's actually dying. And he realises that he's had an argument with his wife and he's never going to be able to return home to make things right. Strip the Soul is an incredibly strong track on this album. It starts with, the simple bass rhythm accompanied by some synth and loose drumming that mutates into alternating guitar and vocal section. Apparently the inspiration for this song were the serial killers Fred and Rosa West from our neck of the woods, Gloucestershire, apparently. There's a real sense of revulsion here. It's getting into these people's minds. We see the protagonist of the song is portrayed with this horrifying arrogance. Like the Creator in the Master Tape song, he's raised kids good, beat the kids good and tie them up. He seems to have lost all human empathy, and the arrangement can only be described as supremely uncomfortable, transforming the song into something darkly poetic. Collapse the Light into the Earth. The final track on this differs slightly, as it seems to be. You get this wistful or plaintive piano tones. Wilson said this is a song about 9/11. He goes on to say, not literally as it's a breakup song really, but there's something about it that will always be imbued for sadness and grief of that tragedy for me. Anyway, we've been watching an episode of Classic Album Review. I thank you for your support, your patronage. And I'll leave you with my closing salvo as usual, which is I hope you're well, staying safe, but more importantly that you keep listening.